Well, the time has finally come to get this thing on the dyno and see what sort of numbers it's going to make. So stay tuned. Before we get into anything, a few weeks ago I asked you guys for some suggestions on what we can name the channel, because moving forward I want to name the channel, and I've settled on calling the channel DK Off-Road. So any future merch and anything along those lines will be branded as that. And also I've managed to whip up a new intro which you would have just seen. I tried to keep it just short and sweet, so let me know what you think of that. But in regards to the name, nothing else on the channel will change. Like, it's just a branding name, so nothing too massive, but that's what's going to happen moving forward. If you want to see the full explanation, I think it was in the first video of this year, so go and check that out. My friend Callie at Pee-wee Logo has managed to merge the two car designs and just make up like a channel logo that I can throw on the intro. So massive thanks to her for that. And also a massive thanks to the guys at Roadrunner Off-Road. Their ongoing support is always appreciated. But quickly, before we get into the dyno, I'm just finishing a few last things, but I'll show you the latest on this. I've done a few little things and got some things done in preparation for the dyno and the upcoming trip. So we'll quickly smash them out. So I've managed to chuck in the oil pressure sensor. That's all wired in and working. This is a little bit messy here, but this is all getting cleaned up soon. And this is sort of just a temporary spot for it. I'll find a better spot soon. So with the new turbo, the cooler piping was slightly too short. It was sort of on the edge. So I got this cut off and extended a little bit. I also had like a provision for a blow-off valve that I used to run years ago that I don't run anymore. So it just looks a lot cleaner now, extended and without that little provision there. The dump pipe's all done. So this is the external gate exhaust pipe. You can see it's got a little flexi joiner in there. If you're using a flexi joiner in the dump pipe, these ones are the one to use. You can't use them woven stainless wire ones because they do collapse in, which did happen to me. You can't really see the dump pipe, so I'll jump underneath and we'll have a quick look. So you can see the dump pipe there. Come up pretty nice and clean. I've already driven this through some mud, so it looks a bit dirty. We've also replaced the muffler with a little bit smaller one. The one that was on there was pretty big and it was smashed up. So I decided to chuck a smaller one in there. I also wanted it to be a little bit more noisier. So this should sound pretty good. I've also made a bit of a plate up just to mount the ECU. This was all just shoved in here and the carpet went over it and I just forgot about it. It is not quite finished yet. I just got to finish tying some stuff up like all this, but that should be nice and neat when it's done. And I've put some sound deadening and some carpet underlay behind it to protect it from the heat of the firewall. So it's not quite ready for our Easter trip, but it is ready for the dyno. It's going down to the usual place down at Independent Motorsports. The guys there, Stuthy, he's like tuned my cars for years. I think he first done my original Skyline in like 2012. So that's over 10 years he's been tuning my cars. He's done this car a fair few times, even back in 2016 when I first turboed it. He tuned it and he's done the race car and all sorts. There's plenty of dyno videos I've put up. If you're interested, check him out. But massive thanks to Stuthy down there at Independent Motorsports because he's a massive help. It's actually been 3 years and 1 week since this car was on the dyno last. And I think the last thing we done to it was we put the water meth on it, and I think I put this intake manifold on it. This was before I even had a YouTube channel. And I also think I had the head off it to do the valve springs and then rebuilt the head and just put a fresh gasket in. It's been going strong ever since then. But sometimes it feels like my cars are on the dyno a lot, but it's just funny to think there's been over 3 years since it's been on a dyno. So I'm actually pumped to go back and see what sort of numbers this can push. So I'm just about to head off, but before I get there, just for anyone that might be watching this video and hasn't been following the channel at all, I'll quickly run through the setup that we've got. So we are running a completely stock bottom end TB42. The only thing that's been done to the head is valve springs, and then like it's had new valves put in it, reseated, and new stem seals and that, so just a fresh rebuild on the head. I put 12.9 grade cap head bolts in, which I'd done not that long ago, like 2 or 3 episodes ago, so go and check that out. I run a RB20 top half intake manifold that runs a throttle body on the front, so it's just easier for intercooler piping and then access to injectors and spark plugs. This intake manifold does not work for the TB45. I've had this question a lot. The TB45 is one piece, and the TB45 and TB42 intake manifolds aren't interchangeable. So if you've got a TB45, you can't do this. We're running Bosch 550cc injectors. They just directly go into the rail with the rail adapter, 11 to 14 mil rail adapter, and then we've got plug adapters, so it's a complete bolt-in. Front mount intercooler hidden in the front here. It's a 300 by 600 by 76. We're running a Haltech Elite 750 ECU, which is why we're able to run the LS coils, the direct fire ignition, which also runs a electronic boost controller, and we also run the wideband in the dump pipe as well. We run an Aquamist water methanol injection system, so that's where it gets injected there, just straight into the intake after the intercooler. It's the same water meth kit that I run on both cars, and Independent Motorsports know how to set them up. They stock these kits, so if you are looking to go water meth injection, they are the guys to see. I've got a ProFlow fuel pressure reg, which is rising rate, and then I've just put a gauge on it, just in case you need to diagnose something. It's got a Fleet Guard airbox. We're running a factory Nissan TD42 turbo manifold, and then I've just had the wastegate welded on there on top. That's a GFB 44mm gate. And then we're running a Hypergear ATR 43 Pro S model turbo. It has a 0.82 rear housing. It also has a ball bearing core and a couple other things you can option when you buy them turbos from Hypergear. But massive thanks to Teo at Hypergear for sorting that turbo out for me. It's pretty similar to the one that's on my race car. It's just like a slightly updated model and slightly different size, so it should make some good power. The 3 or 4 previous videos I've uploaded are all doing stuff to this, so go and check them out if you want more detail on everything that we've done. But I'm starting to run late, so we better get this thing going and we'll head down to the dyno. Well, here we are, Independent Motorsports. Cruise in and get her on the dyno. If you are in the area, make sure you pop in and see them. They've got a new storefront with heaps of parts in there, so they've got pretty much everything that you need, and if they don't have it in there, they can get it in. And the big wall of AN fittings is quite impressive, so go check it out. They're also big online now. They've got a massive online parts store as well, so even if you're not in the area, jump online and check it out. There you're right. For reference, this is what it's making now. You can see it peaks out at 250 kilowatts up here, and it peaks 600 newton meters of torque at about 3600. And then the boost slowly ramps in. We'll sort of peak boost by about 2600, a little bit fatter in the middle, and then taper it off at the end. So this is a dyno graph with power and air fuel ratio, and you can see it was leaning out right at the top, so we did have a fuel issue. So we pulled the in-tank fuel pump out just to check the wiring, the pump itself and the gauze filter, just to make sure there wasn't any immediate problems that we could see. We fiddled with the fuel pressure regulator and we found that winding more pressure into it didn't actually do anything. It didn't show any more on the gauge. We then hooked it up to the fuel system analyzer just to make sure what the problem was, and we found that when we increased pressure, it decreased flow. So after checking the wiring and everything, the hoses and everything, we diagnosed it with a bad fuel pump. So we pulled the pump all the way out and threw a Raceworks 340 in. With the new fuel pump in there, the pressure regulator actually went off the dial. So yeah, we adjusted it back to what it's supposed to be, and it's back on the dyno, ready to go. So that's it, that's the final result. Just shy of 270 kilowatts at the hubs and 658 Newton meters of torque. So this is the final result. So what you're looking at here is the blue line is what it was before, and the red line is what it was on the very last run of the day. The line with the dots in it, the lower lines, that is the torque, which is red on the right hand side of the graph. And then the lines with no dots in it that peak right up the top, that is the power figure in kilowatts, which is red on the left side of the graph, and the RPM is down the bottom. So you can see right at the very start where the two red lines come on a little bit later in the RPM. It's probably like 100 RPM, 150 RPM. So that's because of the slightly bigger turbo. But then you can see the torque of the red line, which is the current setup today. You can see how much higher that peaks at around 2800 RPM. At that exact moment, you're looking at an extra 75 Newton meters of torque right at that RPM range, which is massive. And it's right in that usable rev range, you know, just off the bottom. So them massive gains are pretty much where you drive the car 90% of the time. So that's going to be super noticeable. Towards the end of the run, the boost tapered off a little bit, but you can still see that right at the peak, you know, we're making nearly an extra 20 kilowatts. And the overall peak torque is nearly 60 Newton meters difference. You can see that little spike in torque in the blue line at 3600. That would have been a boost controller thing. It probably would have had an extra half a pound of boost in it there, which is why you see that spike. It roughly sits at about 575 Newton meters. So we've seen some pretty good gains today. Here is a bit better look of the graph just from today by itself. So you can see where it starts, all the way on the left at the bottom. That nice ramp up actually is going to be pretty good. It's going to come on pretty strong. You know, that section of the rev range is where it'll like sink you into the seat, and then just you can see clearer where that peak torque is. Like, yeah, it's a perfect part of the rev range. So this is before and after with power on the high line again, and then the dotted line is actually boost pressure, which is red on that right hand side of the graph. So if you look right at the start at the low RPMs, we've lost a maximum of 200 RPM in spool, which is going to be virtually unnoticeable. You can see the power line, you know, they're really not that far different. We are running about an extra 1 to 2 pound more boost. It peaked at like 17 for a split second, and then for most of the run it's the high 16s, and then you can see right around 3900 you can see it drops off nearly a pound at the end there, which gave us a 267. So if that line held all the way through consistently, it would have made mid 270s, but that's just a little bit more refining needed on the boost controller right at the very top. But the good thing about the closed loop boost control with the Haltech is that it does have self-learning function. So the more I drive it, that will flatten out nicely. Just on the drive home, I can already tell the mid-range is heaps stronger. It comes on a bit harder, but you can feel it just pulls like a freight train through the mid-range, which is exactly what I was looking for. Just in that rev range between like 2,000 and 3,500, it's just absolutely awesome. It did take a bit longer than first expected. The last few dyno runs, like even with this car years ago, and the last few with the race car have been pretty straightforward, like pretty quick. But as you've seen just before, yeah, the fuel pump problem sort of held us up and then diagnosing it. So it took a few hours longer than first expected. But once again, I can't thank Stuffy and the guys down at Independent Motorsports enough. Like, he really went above and beyond this time. You know, hold up the dyno to put a fuel pump in it and stuff around with that, and then still get all the tune dialed in. Like, that's massively appreciated. So if you are looking for any performance upgrades, dyno tuning, parts and whatever, I know I've said it a few times, just go and see them. They are the guys to see. So this time around, we did actually upgrade the Haltech Elite software. So Haltech have released a Nexus update for their Elite Series ECU, which is pretty awesome. It comes with a few added bonuses, and then the new software as well, which is a lot faster and just a lot more streamlined. And we also set up closed loop boost control this time. So previously we were just running open loop, which is just a predetermined duty cycle percentage on the electronic boost controller. But now with closed loop, it's just predetermined how much boost you want to run, and the ECU controls the electronic boost controller to make sure it still hits the target boost pressure. So what I was finding is up the high country and that, like, you'd lose a few PSI in the thin air, but yeah, having the closed loop system should sort of band-aid that, and we should still be running the power that we see down a bit lower. Now, just to prove sort of how good this intake system works and how good the water meth works, we done, like, towards the end, we're just doing back-to-back runs, and it was just making like 270 kilowatts consistently for the last like 10 runs or whatever it was. And then he was just dialing in the boost controller. The very last one was the one that you would have seen, the 267. And that's just because on that run, the boost slightly tapered off at the end. But right at the end, we were skeptical of what the gauge was saying the air temp was. It was just hovering around 7-8 degrees, and we sort of didn't really believe it. But you put your hand on here after all them dyno runs, and it was cold. Like, it was colder than the steel panels on the door. You know, it was actually very surprising. Even I didn't expect that. But that's a combination of, you know, having the cooler piping away from the hot side, a big intercooler, the fan, and then most importantly, the water meth injection, pumping it in, keeps them intake temps in check, which in turn makes it a lot safer to push it a little bit further, a little bit more timing, and a little bit more boost. So it's definitely good stuff. Now, I just know I'm gonna get this statement. Let me say it for you. It's 267 kilowatts at the hubs. It's probably only 100 less kilowatts at the wheels. Now, at the end of the day, the dyno is just a tuning tool. I'm no expert in dynos, but the hub dyno just seems way better. It's just way more consistent, and you don't have the inconsistency of tyre size, pressure, the way you tie it down, all this stuff that can affect everything. And it sort of proved it. You know, the last 10 runs were literally within 2 kilowatts every single run. Again, I'm no expert, but there's no real way to like calculate hub to wheels, I guess. But I'll just overlay the original dyno sheet for this car back in 2016. So it actually had the turbo setup that was just on it, but we're only running a Nistune ECU, super basic. It was running 11 PSI, and that was actually on a chassis dyno. So I'll overlay it now. So this is the original dyno sheet from when I first put the turbo on this car. I transferred it from my old car to this car. And then at this stage, Independent Motorsports did not have a hub dyno, so it went on their chassis dyno. Now this is just with an Nistune ECU, so very basic, normal ignition stuff, like, yeah, nothing fancy at all. You can see the boost right up at the high RPM peaks at about 11 PSI, and then power peaks at, you know, 175 kilowatts. And then if I flick over to the dyno sheet from today, which shows no water meth injection, so this is like the base tune when the water meth turned off. This also peaks at 11 PSI. Ignore the lower line, that's torque. The other sheet didn't have torque. So if you look at the power line, it peaks at 205.8 kilowatts, so 206 kilowatts. So there's a difference of roughly 31 kilowatt. And then what you got to also consider is this is with the new turbo, and it's got a Haltech, you know, and the LS coils and the forward face and plenum. So we've had a couple upgrades. So, you know, at a difference of 31 kilowatts with some upgrades, it seems like, you know, 30 kilowatts is like the absolute max difference. between the wheels and the hubs in my case. So at the end of the day, just having a wild guess, I would suggest that it's probably around 220, 230 kilowatts at the wheels, but I really don't care. I'm just worried about what the curve looks like and how drivable the car is. But so far, it's been some impressive gains. I can't wait to get it out on the tracks. So I hope you enjoyed this one. I know it's just me talking a lot, but I'm super pumped on this. I love dyno days. I love the numbers and that, and I love, you know, looking at the torque curve and all the different data. I just fiend that sort of stuff. But we're one step closer to getting ready for Easter, which is coming up real fast. It's like 2 weeks away. So I've got a couple small jobs to do to the car, and then just a bit of a once over, and then we're gonna pack, and then it'll be time to leave. So all that's coming up, so make sure you stay tuned, and we'll see you on the next one. Left a little bit. Oh, right, sorry, right. Righto. Drive.